Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho, and joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I am hugely terrific, my brother, and to be very honest with you, I can't wait again to be hosted by, you know what? The kid from Nyakajeme.
Thanks, Shaka. A warm welcome to you, all our Facebook followers watching us from all over the world. Shaka Extra Time is a place where you get to talk to Shaka and ask him some questions about politics, about anything you really want to talk about. And today is the day we are talking about a whole lot of issues. I think we'll start maybe in Ethiopia. Shaka, something remarkable just happened in Ethiopia. The new prime minister there seems to be on a good trajectory so far. He has lifted the long time state of emergency. This has been going on for a long time. I guess every couple months they extend it, but he seems to be wanting to close that chapter. Your thoughts?
Incredible. I mean, I think that there are incredibly remarkable developments, political developments, frankly, that are happening in the Horn of Africa. It's not probably a lot of people, frankly, that expected the sort of change that you're talking about, reflecting a sort of trajectory change. It looks like this young man, the 42-year-old Abiy Ahmed, may be up to something. He looks very handsome, highly educated, he has military credentials. He seems to have a Midas touch, really, because a lot of people that I talk to and I talk with from Ethiopia, they seem to like the guy. Everything that he seems to touch, frankly, seems to turn into some kind of political gold. I mean, let's face it, you had the state of emergency, which was declared back in February. It's supposed to be 6 months. Can you believe it? They have actually ended up 2 months before it is supposed to end. So something is happening. And of course, people are also responding on the ground. You no longer hear a lot of uprisings. As a matter of fact, you don't hear a lot of protests anymore. Actually, what we are getting now is that each time they release some of these prisoners, somehow people celebrate them. People welcome them, in fact, as heroes, not as terrorists, you know, the kind of label that they had actually been given by the state. And it is also interesting that for the first time, at least in the history of Ethiopia or Abyssinia, or whatever you want to call it, the single most perhaps important ethnic community, the most populous ethnic community in Ethiopia, the Oromo, appear to be in charge. And guess what? They seem, in fact, to have been liberated by one of the smallest ethnic communities, the Tigrinya, who are like 6% of the population.
But wait a minute, Shaka. I've spoken to a lot of people from Oromia. They are still complaining. They say, you know what, yes, we have a guy in charge, but it's just on paper. We haven't seen that reflected in our lives.
They have reason, obviously, to be very suspicious because I happen to be one of those people who also believe that you don't necessarily have to believe everything you hear from the mouth of a politician. But in this particular case, this man is going a little bit further in the sense that he doesn't simply only to be talking the talk. He seems sincerely, at least for now, to be walking a bit of the talk, especially when you talk about ending the state of emergency. This is huge, Paul. It's huge. No matter who you think about him, no matter what you think about the ruling TPDF, I mean, really, let's face it. This is something. There is some kind of movement. But of course, you know, as they say, let's wait and see if, in fact, that reflects the opening of the political space in the sense that the opposition groups actually can not only feel confident, but actually get the opportunity, for example, to hold some kind of rallies and begin to have conversations with their supporters.
Yeah. Let's go to some of our Facebook comments. Let's start in Addis Ababa. Teliku Adamu says, Shaka, the current government of Ethiopia has been promoting ethnic identity politics for the past 27 years. Africa should learn from Ethiopia's experience about the effects of ethnic identity politics. What do you think, Shaka?
You know, yes, I think they tried, and in fact, they are not really inventing the political wheel. I mean, there are other people in the past who have attempted to do that, and in fact, we can go back to what was apartheid South Africa. It had decided that the people who look like you and me were not part of what was called South Africa. They had decided to allocate them to some very small, arid, non-productive type of, areas which were called Bantustan. But guess what? In 1994, my friend, all that came to an end. We no longer have people who come from, from some of these places, which were called Transkei and what have you. We have people who come from the Republic of South Africa. And the people who look like you and me happen now, frankly, to be the ones that are pulling the levers of power out of Pretoria. And so when you talk about that gentleman complaining about what, happened before, yes, it happened, but I'm told by some sources, by the way, that in the largest, province or state of Oromio, the president, in fact, has said, forget about these identity cards, which identify you as Oromo. We are now all Ethiopians. So let's wait and see what happens. It seems to me that there is some kind of movement to forget about these differences in terms of ethnicity, in terms of linguistic differences and all that kind of stuff, and hopefully they will end up all looking at themselves as Ethiopians.
Let's cross over to neighboring Kenya. There is a lot happening in terms of fighting corruption. Kenya has been known for as one of those countries that is very corrupt. You could argue that a lot of politicians, a lot of civil servants are corrupt. Now the corruption seems to be catching on to the youth. As we speak, there was a number of youth who have been charged. I think they were involved in a huge, big corruption scandal that has rocked the country. Let's take maybe a deep look into corruption in Kenya. How big is it?
It is very huge. It is often said that when it comes to Kenya, and you're talking about corruption, and especially when you're dealing with the big man type of syndrome, that if in fact somebody is caught, you don't need to worry about hiring a lawyer, for example. You know why? Because they say you can actually buy a judge. But it looks like, it looks like there is a new kid on the block. There is the new Chief Justice. He seems to be speaking a different language. And he also seems really to be doing things a little bit differently. He seems to have at least, sort of made the Kenyans really, for the most part, sort of develop some sense of confidence in the ability of the judiciary system to actually do its work, especially given what happened last year on September the 1st, when for the first time on the African continent, a judiciary, a Supreme Court of a country like Kenya decided to annul the presidential vote. This is the first time that it has happened in Africa, and the fourth time only, by the way, that it has happened globally. So there is a lot of expectation about, the judiciary system, how it can do its job, And also, let's face it, the question is, do these people in fact have evidence? Because a lot of times they arrest people and what have you, take them to the courts, and the courts obviously don't have much they can do unless there is the almighty evidence. But when you talk about evidence, what sort of evidence are we talking about here? Because to be very honest with you, I think when it comes to the type of corruption that obtains not only in Kenya, in most of Africa, even a blind person can see the evidence. We're talking about the Transparency International. It has come up with a very, very interesting idea that, in fact, you should use what they call lifestyle audit. For example, I know a guy like you, Paul Ndiho. If I know, for example, how much you earn, and you could even tell me how much you save out of that, surely I can actually go and look at your bank account and see whether what you earn is a reflection of what is there or not. I can also find out some of the assets that you have or which are in your names or the names of your relatives or friends or that kind of stuff. So I think when we use lifestyle audit, to be very honest with you, a lot of these people are going to be apprehended and prosecuted and probably sent to courts. And when you send these people to court, to be honest with you, you should be able, in fact, even to throw away the keys, because corruption actually kills more people than those probably that die actually in civil wars. You have a situation in Kenya, a man who was born in very humble beginnings. But today, this man has a helicopter to boot. He has many hotels in his name. He has too much land, too much, ranch and all kind of stuff. Where does he get these things from? He should be made to account for how he got some of these things. And some of these people are very, very powerful. They are strategically located in terms of the state. And when you see some of these people who have actually been arrested, who are called suspects, they are in fact people who reflect what is called political patronage of the big man. The problem with Kenya is that, like some often would say, that a fish, for example, rots from the head. So in this particular corruption, where do you in fact begin?
So you start with the head of the country.
But yet he's the guy that has the power, in fact. Nobody says the guy is, by the way, corrupt, but he seems to have inherited things that may be very, very difficult to account for.
Interesting. Let's stay in Kenya. The president that you just made reference to has publicly stated that I think this corruption has gotten out of hand. As a matter of fact, a couple of days ago when he was addressing people on Madaraka Day, he sort of said that he directed all government procurement officers to step aside and undergo fresh vetting. How big of a problem is this? Is it just in civil service, or its corruption is all over the place?
First of all, I hope that, the efforts obviously are very good and the rhetoric is very good. But I honestly hope that it is not going to end up into a selective type of fighting against corruption. That in fact, it is going to be a sincere exercise. If it becomes a sincere exercise, it is going to be impossible, because people will tell you, and it's not only Kenya, by the way, you can even look at the entire East African region. Some might, of course, probably say, with the exception of the Republic of Rwanda, but there are other people who say also Rwanda has got its own problems. Because you see, my friend, these people, to be honest with you, in a sense, what they have perfected, and Kenya is one of the leaders in that particular sense. They have succeeded over the years in institutionalizing what you call corruption and impunity.
When is our turn to eat?
Exactly, and you know that book, of course, and the man who was behind it is John Githongo, a man who happened to be very strategically located in the president's office under Mwai Kibaki. He was the permanent secretary who was supposed, in fact, to fight that vice. But guess what happened to him? It just didn't work.
Interesting. Let's go to another Facebook comment from Wawai Patrick. He writes, what stops the flow of migrants from Africa to Europe? Can African governments create enough jobs to stop this suffering and these people dying? Like as of last weekend, about 112 people died trying to cross over to Europe. They died off the coast of Tunisia. What can governments do at a very basic level maybe to stop this exodus of people going to Europe?
You see, the tragedy, of course, is that you do have two forces. You have, on the one hand, forces that push, meaning young people realize that they do not have hope really where they are living in a lot of African countries. And there are these forces that pull, and they seem obviously to be in Europe or seem to be in America across the Atlantic. And this is where these young people are trying to go, hoping that they could probably, find what people normally refer to as the greener pastures. There is no question that the people who are in control or in charge of the store in a lot of African countries are obviously not in charge of the store. Why do I say that? I say that because if they were in charge of the store, most of African countries are not poor in terms of wealth, in terms of potential. They are simply too rich. But of course, nobody can eat potential. And so these people are not coming up with ideas, or if they are ideas, they are not embracing these ideas, which could somehow translate into positions, into jobs, into employment, those types of things. Because let's face it, you talk about China being one of the richest in the world. It is the second largest economy in the world. But guess how China has actually become what it is today? Yes, it is true that they have acquired some skill sets, scientific skills and what have you, to turn, raw materials into products, which obviously are a reflection of what they call adding value. But where do these raw materials come from for the most part?
In Africa.
They come from Africa. You're talking about a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo. You go to Katanga, you look at the copper, you look at the cobalt, you go to some other place in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, you look at cobalt, and then you look at your cell phone right there. Without the coltan that is coming from that country, probably we wouldn't have this type of gadget. And when you look at people who live in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, sincerely, they do not look like they live in a neighborhood which even is based economically on sweet potatoes. I have been to Mbujimai, for example, which is the epicenter of diamonds. To be honest with you, Paul, if you go to Mbujimai today, like I did about almost 20 years ago, you'll probably get the same feeling because you will not see anything very serious right there. And yet, guess what? When you go to New York City, you go to Park Avenue, you can't buy a ring or a watch that in a sense is a reflection of the diamond that came from Mbujimai. So we have a problem. We need leaders, to be very honest with you, leaders who have integrity, leaders who have character, leaders who are patriotic to their societies, their countries, leaders who feel for their people, not leaders who are patriotic to their stomach, the stomach of their families and the stomach of their friends. In fact, most of the richest people in Africa, as opposed to probably elsewhere in the world, are people who happen to be politicians, people who happen to be presidents, ministers, and that kind of stuff. So we probably need to do some kind of lifestyle audit in Africa. But I think that the Europeans also have a responsibility because, let's face it, they have dominated Africa for centuries. In fact, when you read this book called How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walt Rodney from Guyana, he probably might have actually said how Africa developed Europe and North America.
No question about it. Shaka, let me go back to the same point that you just made. Is it about wages? There are people who argue that the reason there is this exodus of young people trying to leave Africa is because they want better wages. They want to do better for themselves. They want to put food on the table for themselves. They want to develop themselves. You can talk about us here. People say, hey, we left Africa, we are here, we are doing this. And people look at us and they want to be us. So how do you maybe explain to these people so that they can understand? What does it take to stop this? People are dying every day.
It's very interesting that you raised that very, very interesting question, Paul, because in fact, that is going to be our subject for Straight Talk Africa tomorrow. We're going to look at migrations, actually African migrations, the forces that pull and push. Well, you are right in saying that some of us, in a sense, are reflections of the dream of the young people who happen to be in Africa, and they listen to music. It could be from Nollywood, Nigeria. They look at films and stuff like that. It could be Hollywood, California, and what have you, and they feel like they want to be there, and why not? The fact of the matter is that they can obviously look at you. You crossed the Atlantic, and you worked very hard.
I didn't use the ship, though.
You were very disciplined. Well, you are lucky because it wasn't the times where you had to go on a ship, because, in fact, tomorrow, one of the key guests on the show, a Professor Fola, retired, but not tired, from Nigeria, he actually came on a ship in 1956 to come to go to college. He got a degree in the Midwest, got a master's degree and a PhD at Northwestern, became a professor, went back to Africa and paid some dues, taught at the University of Zambia, by the way, when it was just beginning. You remember that beautiful campus that we did some, town hall kind of discussion. And he spent 7 years there and then came back to America and taught at some universities here, and then went back to his home country, Nigeria, taught there, I suppose, for about 10 years or something, and came back here so that his daughters could get the benefit of what he called good education, as if education couldn't actually be provided for in beautiful Nigeria. So you look at all these dynamics. There is a lot of things that we can actually do. It's simply a question of getting the right people in the right position sincerely, and people who actually care, again, about their people. People who are not contemptuous about their people. People who do not feel that they are better off than the others, and yet they are actually climbing on the back of the majority of the ordinary poor taxpayer. So I think it is an issue of governance. It is an issue of governance that needs to be solved sincerely yesterday, not today or tomorrow, yesterday.
Okay, let's maybe, we still have time for maybe one more question. Let's go to another Facebook comment. Let's go to Farai Isaac. What's your take on the upcoming elections in Zimbabwe?
Well, to be honest with you, I would like to say that we need to give Zimbabwe the benefit of the doubt. We've been promised that this time around they're actually going to hold elections, not selections. That these elections are actually going to be credible, they're going to be free, fair, transparent, and verifiable. They have also, for the first time, since probably 2002, they have actually invited foreign observers, including the European Union. And I think that the Kenyatta Center will probably be there, and some American groups will be there, and what have you. But most importantly, let's hope that the Electoral Commission in Harare will be an electoral commission that is going to be doing its job professionally and make sure that this indeed is an election, and an election that is going to take place in an environment that provides some sort of what I would call a sort of political playing field that is leveled, where people, including those representing the opposition, will have an opportunity to sell their message unmolested and intimidated by the state police, and that at the end of the day, the exercise and the process will be good in such a way that the results at the end of the day will reflect the will of the people, the will of the voter, not the will of the individual that announces the election results or who counts the elections, the votes.
How about people who make the argument, for example, that Mnangagwa and company will probably not cede power because they just got that power. They still want to be around, at least maybe live up to some of their promises they made to the people of Zimbabwe?
Well, let's face it, I'm sure that they are very much interested, obviously, in retaining power, but then again, it should really not depend on what they think, on how they feel. It should depend on how the people of Zimbabwe think and feel. And when you talk about Mnangagwa, why not? I mean, he's a Zimbabwean. He's a human being. He's ambitious. He's, you know, he has the right to have expectations, and he has the right to appear, or rather to aspire to either remain where he is or to aspire something much better than where he is. Why not? But let's face it, he has the advantages, obviously, because he's an incumbent. You can't, you know, you can't do much about that. But let's hope that he's not going to use the incumbency in a manner that is unconstitutional.
What's wrong with that?
It is, everything is wrong with it, because the document called the Constitution, no matter where you are, perhaps with the exception of Britain, even though the British are the only country on this planet Earth who have a constitution that is not written. Their constitution is not written, but almost every country that I know about have written constitutions, and that happens to be the highest law of the land.
Shaka, unfortunately, we have to end it right here. Thank you so much for being a great guest. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington.